How fast is the AI revolution really happening? When will Skynet be fully operational? What would machine superintelligence mean for ordinary mortals like us? My guest today is an AI researcher who's written a dramatic forecast suggesting that by 2027, some kind of machine god may be with us, ushering in a weird post-scarcity utopia, or threatening to kill us all.
Yes, friends, it's true. There are a group of AI researchers who are predicting that the world will likely end in 2027 because of the alignment problem between AI and humans. And there is something about this paper, I think, as Christians, we need to pay special attention to, that we are personally, as a community, responsible for. So Jesus has sent us to be salt and light, and there is an aspect of this, the real key aspect to the reason why this is such an existential threat to everyone in the world is because of the coming arms race in AI between China and the United States. And I believe that we as Christians have a direct responsibility for how this plays out. So listen to the way that they describe the arms race that's coming, the real root reason why there's going to be a misalignment between humans and AI. And I'm going to talk to you guys a little bit about what we can do about it.
Good. So let's talk about the arms race element here, right? Because this is actually crucial to the way that your scenario plays itself out, right? We already see this kind of competition between the US and China. And so that, in your view, becomes kind of the core geopolitical reason why governments just keep saying yes and yes and yes to each new thing that the superintelligence is suggesting. I want to sort of drill down a little bit on the fears that would motivate this, right? Because this would be an economic arms race, okay, but it's also a sort of military tech arms race. And that's what gives it this kind of existential feeling, like the whole Cold War condensed into 18 months.
That's right. So we could start first with the case where they both have superintelligences, but one side keeps them locked up in a box, so to speak, not really doing much in the economy, and the other side aggressively deploys them into their economy and military, and lets them design all sorts of new robot factories and, manage the construction of all sorts of new factories and production lines, and all sorts of crazy new technologies are being tested and built and deployed, including crazy new weapons and integrated into the military. I think that in that case, you would end up after a year or so in a situation where there would just be complete technological dominance of one side over the other. So if the US does this step and the China doesn't, let's say, then all the best products on the market would be Chinese products. They'd be cheaper and superior. Meanwhile, militarily, there'd be giant fleets of amazing stealth drones or whatever it is that the superintelligence have concocted that can just completely wipe the floor with American Air Force and Army and so forth. And not only that, but there's a possibility that they could undermine American nuclear deterrence as well. Like maybe all of our nukes would be shot out of the sky by the fancy new laser arrays or whatever it is that the superintelligences have built. It's hard to predict, obviously, what this would exactly look like, but it's a good bet that they'll be able to come up with something that's extremely militarily powerful, basically.
And so then you get into a dynamic that is like the darkest days of the Cold War, where each side is concerned not just about dominance, but basically about a first strike.
That's right.
Your expectation is, and I think this is reasonable, that the speed of the arms race would bring that fear front and center really quickly.
That's right. I think that you're sort of sticking your head in the sand if you think that an army of superintelligences given a whole year and no red tape and lots of money and funding would be unable to figure out a way to undermine nuclear deterrent.
All right, so why can't we just get all the benefits from AI without all these downsides? There is one basic reason, because there's an arms race going on. And so if anybody starts to pump the brakes on AI, then because we are in an existential conflict or competition with China and other powers potentially in the future, then the other person, whoever is willing to go all the way, is going to overcome those obstacles and become so technologically advanced that they're going to dominate us or dominate every other player in the field with their AI superintelligence. So this is the sort of game theoretic problem that we're up against. And one of the things that's fascinating to me is that atheists have decided to use a particular word for this existential risk. And the word they are using increasingly is Moloch. So Moloch is the Canaanite god, and the way that they are describing Moloch, famous in the Old Testament for really requiring human sacrifice to be appeased. What they're saying is that Moloch is the agent that creates this dilemma. Moloch is the thing, the god or the demon, if you will, that would cause when both sides don't want this to happen, right? So if you were to wake up one day after an arms race between the United States and China over AI, and the AI agent became super powerful and began to wipe out everyone on the planet, the way that they sort of surmise this could easily happen is is that they would release a bioweapon that killed 99% of the human race and then send out drones to destroy the rest. Obviously, China and the United States would say, hey, we didn't want that to happen. So who wanted that to happen? Who was the agent who wanted the human race to be destroyed in that way? Who wants this dystopia? If nobody wants it, but we created it, how did that happen? And so this confuses deeply everyone, because how do you get a actual result that nobody wanted? And so they said there is somebody who wants it, and we need to give a name to that agent, and that name is Moloch. Moloch is what happens when you have a result that occurs because both sides were pursuing their ends, but it was predictable that in doing that, something that both didn't want occurs, right? This externality that wipes out the human race simply because there was a lack of ability to sort of pump the brakes or stop or cooperate. And this is where Christians are uniquely culpable for what is about to happen. So if you think about one way to understand this thought experiment and why Christians are really an important part of this story, if you were to go back to, let's say, the 1910s or 1920s and somehow know that what were the major existential risks if you knew the future? Well, the two risks that you would be really concerned about would probably be Nazi Germany emerging and Imperial Japan. One of the things that I find really interesting about those two areas, and you might add a third, of course, just the Soviet Union and what's going on in what becomes the Soviet Union after the 1917 revolution. All three of those major powers have one thing in common. They were uniquely impervious to the message of the gospel. So Germany was a very Lutheran country, but in the late 1800s, there was a group of German theologians that destroyed the Germans' ability to really believe the gospel. This sort of idea that the Bible is uniquely unreliable took really metastasized inside the German culture and destroyed the faith of an entire country. And so the reason why you have this sort of Nietzschean philosophy that really flourished, it flourished in the ground that was created by those 19th century theologians. So there was a huge gospel problem in Germany. Japan is also an interesting test case. Japan is probably the most impervious major culture to the gospel that we've ever seen. And so as the gospel attempted in many different cases to try to work within Japan, this has been just notoriously difficult. And missiologists have really struggled with how to figure out how to reach Japan with the gospel. And of course, we know after the 1917 revolution in Russia, there was a widespread insistence by this totalitarian state that everyone must become atheistic. And so the gospel then was completely cut off from people, and it was attempted to be stamped out wherever it already existed within Russia. So you have these three powers. And so one of the things that I think is really important to say is Christians we really are struggling to reach these places. And we may, for each one of these challenges, have a limited amount of time to be salt and light within these cultures, to reach these cultures with the gospel, for them to begin to be completely reshaped by the teachings of Jesus and the spread of the gospel, so that there is an opportunity to actually cooperate, for their morality, for their intuitions to be reformed by the story of the gospel and by the teachings of Jesus. It's really important that Christians, we understand that we hold the solution to this problem, because when you look at this coming AI arms race between China and the United States, and you ask yourself the question, why couldn't we cooperate? Why is it impossible for us to just sit down and say, guys, we are both in big trouble here. We need to actually work together. We need to pump the brakes on this thing. We need to be very concerned about alignment. The reason is that there is a lack of trust between China and the United States, because we are having a really hard time as Christians really reaching China with the gospel. Now, there has been amazing things that have happened over the last 3 to 4 decades in China. That Chinese house church movement has exploded beyond anyone's wildest dreams, but it has not infected the culture as a whole, or especially the higher rankings of the Chinese Communist Party. And without that ability to take a big step back and say, okay, we have a lot in common here. We are given a mission by Jesus to disciple the nations. And when we didn't disciple Japan, when we didn't disciple Germany, when we fail at discipling a nation, then we are partially responsible for the existential risks that come upon the planet. But the problem now is that these existential risks are global. Even in World War II, it wasn't global. We did not have enough nuclear weapons to destroy the entire planet yet. Now, the need to spread the gospel to these very difficult, impervious cultures is so critical. Because if we don't disciple these nations into the teachings of Jesus so that they value love and they understand the nature of what love is, that they value truth and they understand the nature of truth, if we don't do this work, then we are facing such an enormous crisis potentially. So if you want to check out these papers about the 2027 papers that are coming out about AI, I think it's really important for us to not just sit here passively and say, okay, wow, that sucks. Like, what's going to happen to us? What about my kids? Guys, we are given a mission by Jesus to actually affect change in the world, and we have responsibility in these situations. What are we going to do about it? So I would love to hear any of your thoughts about this. Yeah, please comment below if you've got any ideas for how do we take responsibility? What is our responsibility as Christians for these predictions and for these likely events that we are seeing very, very close on the horizon?